Well, it's another one of those middle of the night videos. Should I make a series called Late Night Music Thoughts or something? I'm in the incomplete music room right now. And if you've been paying attention to my, next project, the next thing I'm going to buy, sounds is paid off. What do I get next? You've seen that have been trying to incorporate my Fosdex VF160 multi-track recorder into kind of like somewhat modern day, use, whether it be to record onto that system and maybe use a 8-channel preamp into that system to make it a full 16 channel, and then transfer it to a PC for final editing or something like that. That would kind of be nice. So I don't know exactly how to say, what topic this is or whatever. But I'll just talk about my adventures and kind of recording stuff in the past. I have recorded directly into even the cheapest PC sound cards, 1 or 2 channels. I've recorded into, I think it was a Yamaha 4-track recorder, still have some of the tapes there. Probably just a cassette deck. Most likely at one with really bad, heads on them that sounded like garbage, and even some of the cheapest cassette tapes, until I got that multi-track cassette system and I bought tapes that had a more appropriate, audio quality capabilities with those guys. And, I've used multi-track software, I've used loop software, and Cakewalk, and now I'm just, it's probably sounds strange that I'm using a freeware one called Audacity. I would say in the earliest, like, acoustic recordings and stuff, I would use like a really cheap, like, Radio Shack condenser mic. There was always some kind of hums or buzzes in it. Got some cool sounds, but some of the excess noises would have taken it away from being anything studio quality. I also had a really nice crate amplifier for electric guitar with a line out and all that good stuff, but it too was pretty darn noisy. I mean, depending on a lot of factors, you could make use of it in the right songs and mixes. And I also had an Art Mach 2 multi effects processor that was also pretty noisy. I guess we can sort of call this topic regrets of not being a perfectionist. I've heard like Elvis Presley was a perfectionist, and he would get the take right the first time, and he would make possibly dozens or hundreds of takes of songs until the studios basically said, stop, that's enough. But me, I'm going to focus a lot on drums because I haven't put enough practice and never had any kind of lessons, and a lot of times we would do songs and until loops came out, I would just say, okay, that's enough. I hear problems in the drum playing that I am miking, and occasionally I would even do like a keyboard drum machine. Loops kind of changed a lot, especially if you got some good quality loops, and not perfect, at least from my knowledge. I had 5 or 6 sound sample CDs and stuff back in the day, but I would say I didn't get the sound I wanted, but I got an acceptable beat and sound that way. So as far as drums and getting the beats and everything right, and making mistakes, we made a lot of mistakes, and it definitely did mess up songs that could have been decently professional quality back in the day. And I'm almost 50 years old, and I've been messing around with guitars and stuff since I was a kid, basically. And when I started playing with bands and stuff, I usually just got somebody handing me the bass, or say, you're going to be the bass player. And I have a lot of respect for bass players now that I've gotten older. There are some pretty amazing bass players out there, and there are bands that emphasize, we're not going to let the bass player just sit in the background and just boo, 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 whatever bass, we're not going to just let you sit in the background and just barely be heard. We're going to, you're going to get some cool stuff here. I want you to play some cool riffs, beats, whatever you want to call it. And, you kind of learn to respect a bass player more when you listen to a lot of music, and you can eventually get an ear to decipher all the different instruments being played on songs that you hear. But back then I was sort of pushed in it, and I didn't, I thought it was okay, but for the most part I wanted to be playing guitar or possibly singing. And even though we kind of switched roles, we would take turns playing guitar, take turns playing drums, I was always, mainly the bass player. And I basically, after being more of a solo player, messing around with multi-track recording and stuff, I, tried to learn little tricks and, things to try to record better. And, the thing is, I never had a teacher, and I went in basically blind, and some of the analog, cassette multi-track recordings I've done were pretty bad. Getting those levels right is a pretty big thing, because you're recording a whole lot of hiss and air and stuff when you should have maybe higher levels, or maybe if you're overdriving your levels, you should have lower levels, and you should have compression, and and then you can kind of learn EQ and stuff later, as long as you don't have your tracks written in too low or too overdriven, unless some bands obviously overdrive their vocals and stuff like that, and possibly intentionally overdrive drum sounds and everything. When I started sort of messing around with that compression during mixdown and stuff, I didn't have a DAT machine. I did have a DAT machine at one time that I never really tried or used. But this was probably before that time. I was using a VCR. Just, I did 3, 4, 5 songs, and I kind of mastered it and mixed it down through one of the higher quality VCRs that have 4 or 5 hit or whatever, that was really expensive at the time, and it sounded pretty decent, all things considered, that I wasn't likely getting my levels right, that I wasn't using any kind of pre-compression, I wasn't using any kind of EQ, and a lot of my mics and equipment, guitar amplifiers and all, had a lot of hum in them. And then I started experimenting with putting, guitars or, electric guitar with a distortion pedal directly into a sound card, and stuff like that, and doing loops, for the drum tracks, as I said. Putting your bass directly into a sound card, even a bad quality sound card, was probably better than miking bad quality, through analog and stuff like that, and bypassing a lot of those guitar amplifier hums, especially on your distorted channels. Everything started sounding better, when I was recording through Cakewalk. I think I had Cakewalk Sonar quite a few years back, and cleaner sounding, definitely more control of the sound, and using those loops, which people in the know probably know you're using loops, because there's no, I guess, variances or little nuanced differences between the whole song. Basically got 2 or 3 sets of drum playing, and there's never any differences while throughout the whole song. Now, they did sound better than having like a drum machine that didn't sound 100% like a real set of drums. But I think when we got to everything being clearer and sounding better, and like, this could be more professional, this could be something we could do a studio album with or something, release an album. I think I just, instead of trying to get everything as close to perfect, just having that, what would it be like, being, I wouldn't say impatient, but partially impatient, but also saying, let's just stop, that's enough. This is something you may regret 20 years down the road, because you look at all these things that were so close, so close, and tell yourself, if I just practice more and, and did it, kept going until it was right, then I would have things, songs, music that was good. I remember doing a song, and for whatever reason I messed up the vocals in like 5 words or something. So I did like a punch in, and for whatever reason, when I punched that in, it sounded just completely different than the rest of the mix did. And I couldn't fix it no matter what I tried. And that little thing that was like 3 or 4 seconds or whatever kind of ruined that whole song. Then there was one song that, I've recorded a bunch of times, even from those old analog multi-track cassette days, in different ways, and I had it very, very close, probably 80%, if not more. Don't even think I would have had to redo any of the instrument stuff, but it was mostly in that post editing and stuff. But before I could get it done, hard drive crashed and I lost it. No way to recover the multi-track files. I had various mix downs of it, but I just wasn't quite happy with those stereo mixes. And back up your stuff, I guess, is a good thing, especially when you have the song done. Even if you don't have the final mix and master and all that, you might regret it if you lose everything through a hard drive failure. I remember recording a Roland digital piano or electric piano, and again, no EQing, no anything. Just from the line out or the stereo out, and oh my gosh, the freaking low bassy stuff, you couldn't play it loud because you'd probably blow your speakers, and just little things like that. I wish I would have known how to either record right or post edit, and master and make it sound like something that could have been used versus something super harsh. I think if you're inspired by a singer, band, or doing cover songs, I would also say that trying to emulate their exact sound and vocal range and the exact way they sing can be a problem if your voice also doesn't work in that vocal range. And there were even songs that I had written that may not even been inspired by any sort of band, but I probably should have let someone else try to sing those songs. Some of them just sounded horrible, some of them sounded okay, but the bad ones, I kind of had an idea that they were good enough for somebody. They should have been songs. So that's probably something else that I'm not going to say I regret, because you have these ideas that come to your head if you're writing songs, and not all of them work for your voice or whatever. And hopefully somebody else can take your song and make it something. So will or could there possibly be an album in our future, and what would it look like? I do have here's the thing. As you get older, I think a lot of the songs, the ability to write songs, maybe even to write books sometimes for authors, sometimes dwindles. But I have sort of had a couple songs in my head for years that I've never put, pen to paper, and obviously paper to music. And that would be pretty nice to finish out the lyrics to those songs and figure out a beat to them, the guitar, the rhythm, everything for it. But I think for the most part, I have enough old material that I want to revisit and even potentially clean up individual tracks and sounds and make loops, and possibly even be playing guitar with my old recordings, or playing drums. Definitely drums. I have to try to, just as I said earlier in this video, I didn't always perfect everything, and I wasn't really a drum player, but so maybe replacing some of the tracks, and maybe even singing with myself. So singing with myself from 25 years ago be kind of neat. Hank Williams Jr. did that with his old dad's. He had a song, I guess, where he sung with his dad, even though his dad had been dead for a long time. I think I would handle things with an experimental approach, for the most part. I have a lot of acoustic guitars. I got several electric guitars, some of them tuned differently. I got nylon string guitars. I have conga drums. I have an acoustic drum set. I have an electric drum set. And 12-string guitar. So we got a lot of things, including a banjo and some ukuleles. And we got a lot of things to experiment with. If we have to record the same stuff with, 5 or 10 different guitars and see which ones sound the best in the mix, so be it. But I don't think in a lot of cases, in my current mindset, I would be starting from scratch, other than new songs that we have never worked on before. When I got my old Fostex VF160 out the other day testing it, I spent an hour, maybe 2 hours, listening to a lot of my old music, and I kind of noticed things that were good, that were bad, and another one was over-processing my vocals. Maybe in your current whatever, some people just may be self-conscious, and they're thinking their raw vocals is not that great, and putting all these choruses and reverbs and stuff on them makes it sound like you were just over processing it. And I backed off a lot of those effects because they're internal effects that you can change in the Fostex multi-track system, and they sounded better. Now when they're raw with no effects, maybe not 100%, but they were usable in a way where you could minimally sort of change and add a little bit of something to them. And I'm sure in multi-track software, when you got all these plugins that are available and all the control that is available with the EQ frequencies and all, and compression, things would sound a little better. One of the things that I also noticed is that on one of the songs, I was processing my vocals, and I think it wasn't overly processed, not too bad, because the song was kind of dark and it kind of required, a little bit of extra chorus or something, or flange. Was that my mic picked up my acoustic guitar too much, and my vocal mic, that is, and when you really listen to it, that made the freaking acoustic guitar sound all wonky. Now, we had a separate line for the acoustic guitar in that song, and that track was fine, but yeah, just finding ways to also, like, when you're singing and playing an instrument, an acoustic guitar at the same time, trying to limit that noise. I've recorded stuff, in different phases and times, so much that, and even some of the same songs, or a lot of the same songs over and over again, and each one, in each era, in each type of experiment, in each recording environment, digital, analog, they sounded different. So I have a lot of stuff to work with. I mean, my earliest recordings were probably that with my Art Mach 2 probably isn't usable because it's trash, basically. But after that, after we started going multi-track, things got better. When I started doing some acoustic songs on the Fostex VF160, pretty soon after I got it, I recorded a song called When the Snake Bites, and I tried to make it go from acoustic to a little bit of drums, a little bit of try to make it a little bit harder. It was written as like a hard, distorted song, and everything, almost everything in it sounded amazing. The acoustic sounded great. I think my vocals were pretty much spot on, except one little part where I kind of, when I was doing the chorus, I just slowed my voice down just a little bit, and I'm assuming you could take that and put it into your multi-track recorder and maybe just speed up that one segment, if you can get the pitch to sort of stay. But that's not really the big problem I had with that. I had two issues. So I started blasting the drums, and the drum was just way out of, it just didn't sound like they belonged, and like anything was right. But I also had real conga drums, and I was miking them with the Shure SM57, but without compression, how it did EQ and reverb or anything like that. I just sounded okay, but I think I used the term sort of lost in the mix. Probably depended on how hard each time I hit the conga, it might have made some impact. You could hear it on the mix, but the lighter hits, they just didn't. The congas just didn't have the impact. And I would like to see if they were usable, if I could go into that, in software and just level everything out bottom to top, which is, probably what compression should do, and then make it have a little bit of a more ambience and lasting effect with some reverb. Now, I think almost, if not all of my Cakewalk multi-track stuff, as far as individual tracks, got lost. So when that hard drive crashed, so there was no backing those guys up, unfortunately. And like I said earlier, I was probably 80% or so done with the mix of a song called Imperfection Woman, and it was just so close from being done. But we also had, some loop songs. We had messed with some surround sound mixing, and there were quite a few other songs that we got lost, as far as everything except, a variety of mix downs that it would have been nice to go back later and work on individual tracks to perfect them a little bit more. And over time, I did mess with, those mixed down tracks. I, tried to get them to sound a little bit better. I added an intro to Imperfection Woman. I went and did some trickery with a very short song called Party All Day and Party All Night, where I took, what was already available, and I kind of took little segments of the vocals and bounced them left to right in certain areas to give it a really cool effect. And it definitely helped bring that song, a little bit closer to something that was cool. Then, if I recall correctly, there was like this whisper ending, and I took that ending, after all the instruments were done, and I kind of pitch shifted it, to make it sound like, maybe somebody was turning into a monster growl or something, which was kind of cool. One other thing I talked about, with the Fostex VF160 is when I mixed down with that system, it never sounded like when I was playing the tracks before the mix down. And this is probably why I ended up with 7 or 10 different mix downs sometimes, adjusting the volumes, adjusting this and that, trying to get it to sound like what it sounded like, on my stereo or my headphones, and it never would sound that way. So maybe if I could have took those line outs just left and right and went back into some kind of digital recorder or something and used those, that might have worked a little bit better. Going back to listening to that Fostex a few days ago for a few hours, some of my music, there were songs that were so close, and I just pushed my vocals, I guess, a little bit out of where they should have been, and I could see myself trying to go into Cakewalk or whatever we're going to edit in with later, and either trying to make those vocals disappear and see if it still sounds okay, or maybe redoing those vocals. I don't know. I know my voice is not going to sound the same as it did 20 plus years ago or 15 years ago or whatever it was when I did that. I'm guessing it's around 20 years ago though. But this is what I said earlier. It's not regret, but it kind of is. It's partial regret. It's partial, not just pushing through. I think in music you can be 80 or 90% there, and sometimes it's hard to get that final 10%. You can go and go and go until you're tired and worn out, and then you're going to start getting worse. And that's just my opinion, my experience. I'm not a professional musician, but yeah, if you think you have a good song, good music, push yourself to get it right when you have, the equipment and technology now. Nowadays, $300 or $400, $500, you can have stuff that will record you way better than $1,000 30 years ago would have done. And you got the potential to have a good quality recording already. So use your talent and push yourself to get it as good as you can. Don't stop at 90, don't stop at 80, don't stop at 95. Get it, 100%, so that if you want to have somebody else listen to it, they won't say, well, it's good, but or think that. They'll probably tell you it's good. Have it ready so that somebody can say it's good and you can also know it's good. Even if you don't release an album, even if you don't, use music as a career, you could still have something to show your kids or grandkids or have them listen to, and your friends, family. Don't learn these lessons at 40 or 50 or 70 years old, like me. Learn them sooner. Alright guys, my battery's almost dead. Again, when it's late at night, I probably ramble and I probably say things that I, talk in a different way than I normally talk. But I think you get the gist of what we are talking about. So take care, guys.